Welcome to the webinar of the Digital Fifth. We are just making an attempt to get into some components within the CBDC E-Rupee. We know that last month RBI released a note on the CBDCs, that is central bank digital currency. And still it has to go through the multiple pilots then before it takes the final shape and the technologies comes into the place. But we're just making an attempt to look into that. I've been joined by Sanchit Mehra, who is the founder of the Katina Technologies. So we both will be running you through that some of the components of the CBDC. We may not have the answer to everything, but it's just an attempt to make an understanding that what CBDC is all about, what kind of the different design principles that has been laid down to run this CBDC, and some of the technology aspects that typically what has been observed that Sanchit will guide us through that what are the different aspects have been looked at it, which can be explored from the technology deployment. Before that, just quick introduction to some of you may not be knowing me or Sanchit or our firm. So quick introduction will not take much more than that. So we are the Digital Fifth is a fintech and digital consulting firm, almost started 6 years back, and then we have been working with the banks and the fintechs into that space, helping the banks and fintechs into their product management, the digital advisory, technology advisory. We have started our journey in somewhere 2017, and with various services getting launched, and we continued our journey with an expansion into the different regions and continue to expand our training programs, the consulting business, and then we continue to grow. So with all the blessings of yours. We have been reasonably been working predominantly in India market, but we have also been doing some of the works in the different parts of the globe. So be it in the Middle East, South Africa, and some of the other countries. These are just a broad highlight of some of the customers which we would have worked in the space of consulting, training, or the partnership, or the hiring services. That's a probably there. We have a 4 broad service line. The consulting, as we've spoken about, that consulting is our core business line where we work with the banks, NBFCs, and other financial institutions, helping them into building their digital transformation roadmap, digital strategy, building on the open banking strategies, cybersecurity, compliance advisory, and all sort of the consulting assignment that we do with them. Also work very closely with the fintechs and the startups, helping them into building the different journeys, products management, go-to-market strategy, the technology advisory, and all sort of the work that we help these companies into put that their business into place. We do lots of partnership where that many of the fintechs and startups, they may be looking into connect with some of the lenders or the financial partners. We help them into connect with the market. Hiring is another broad major areas that we help companies, especially in the BFSI space, into hiring of the senior positions, be it on the product management, digital technologies. That's where we do that. And training, that's also organize the major service line where we do both on the B2C and B2B services. B2B where we teach various entities, be it on the like Union Bank of India, DBS, HSBC. That's where we train them onto digital banking, digital advice, digital lending, open banking, and all sort of the services. And in B2C space, we run primarily in the executive training program on the fintech, blockchain, and the open banking. That's it. Primarily, we are coming again, starting our new cohort on the 4th of December. We have just concluded the 4th cohort the last week itself. These training programs are primarily designed for the mid to senior guys who want to understand the different dynamics of the digital space, the fintech space, the open banking, and purely into the financial ecosystem, right? These are sessions are interactive sessions, the live and recorded sessions, and being executed by me and Samir, and along with some of the industry mentors, including Sanchit, who comes and train the participants. These are like case studies and capstone projects, which give you a much deeper understanding of the concepts. So that's where that, in case anybody want to reach out, you can reach out to Srikanth. The contact details are there on the page. I don't want to get into detail, but most of the topics covering the digital space gets covered very deep, be it on the fintech, the product management, the digital payments, the lending, and open banking. Every dimensions gets covered in deep, again by the industry mentors. And also we are launching some of the specialization between the digital banking, entrepreneurship, AML, and blockchain. And also we are coming with our own event. It's a fintech large event that called Bharat Fintech Summit, with a focus on collaboration, inclusion, and innovations, with a multi-tracks 2 days agenda. where that probably will be coming up, looking into the various dimensions and then showcase of the various product demos and from the market. And that's probably it's getting done on the ground here. To know more, please visit on the bharatfintechsummit.com. With that, and just quick introduction from my side. I'm myself Shashank Shekhar. I'm heading consulting business at the Digital Fifth. And then I've been associated with the Digital Fifth almost 4 years, worked with Wipro, L&T Infotech, as well as the DCB Bank, heading the technologies. Just quick intro, Sanchit, from your side, and then we can get started.
Thanks, Shashank. And before anybody miscomprehends, I'm not a lawyer. I might be wearing a coat and I might be dressed in white, but I'm not a lawyer. What we are is, Katina is a tech company, and we are about 6 years old, 100 people on the team. And what we do is we support banks, insurance, and basically companies in the BFSI sector get focused on their core expertise through integrations by APIs and SaaS-driven solutions. So what you see here is the entire stack that we cover today. So right from your infrastructure to cloud automation, workflow building, API stack automation, security at the edge, we handle all of that. And besides that, we also do have a few SaaS-ready solutions out of the box, which we work very closely with again banks and insurance companies to make them live. Next slide, please. So the core areas of expertise, to break it down, would be integration, blockchain, AI, and cloud tech. We handle pretty much all of the major integration technologies, including streaming, messaging as well. In blockchain, we cover both private permission as well as public. So some of this day's topic would also revolve around blockchain, and we'll try to see how blockchain fits in there. We also have a footprint in AI, and in cloud tech, we handle all of the major large scalers, as well as open source orchestration tools like Kubernetes and OpenShift as well. So just to give you a brief idea of what the stack is like, Shashank, if you can just move next. Yeah, so this is a stack that we handle today, and it's not a static stack. It's a dynamic, ever-growing stack. So there are probably a lot of logos that I've kept out. But like I said, the important point is we are a full stack company. We enable fintechs to handle the tech part of things while you focus on the fintech. That's from Shashank, over to you.
No, I think Anushka, can you just take care? Yeah, just go ahead, Sanchit.
Yeah. So that's basically it from me here. So now we're probably going to see what CBDC is all about. So, Shashank.
Yeah. So thanks, Ajit. So we know, so today money, if you look at it, has broadly the three basic characteristics, right? Primarily is also as a wealth, stored as a wealth of materialistic value, or it's primarily used as to do the transactions, buy the goods in exchange of the money. And that's we predominantly do that. And also it's you need as an accounting the wealth. So that's primarily the concepts are there behind that. So last year, primarily RBI came back with a paper on the CBDC that primarily the central bank is trying to evaluate. And it's not only the Indian central bank, RBI, but across the globe, the various central bank has been taking an initiative. Within 1 year time, RBI came with a concept note that primarily as a kind of a step forward to start doing the pilots. Okay, so it's very clearly that it may not be the full-fledged launch. It may go through the various pilot stages that's been planned. So that's where the concept note was introduced with a certain design principle, the guiding notes and all these things to launch the CBDC. Some of the critical point that it has already been laid. One is that definitely it's going to be named as a E-Rupee. If there is a difference between E-Rupee with a PEE and the E-Rupee RUPI, which is an NPCI product on the prepaid voucher. The session is not there, but that's there differentiation between E-Rupee and E-Rupee. There are typically two forms of the digital money. One is the definitely one you have the physical currency that's currently there in the market, but in that form of the digital money, one is the fiat money which is held in your bank account and which you probably use in today's balance that all the digital payments and all the digital projections that you want to do that's way that you do that. And second is actually crypto versions or the digital version of the fiat money being held with the central bank. That's probably the agenda of the central bank digital currency. Across the globe, if you try to look at it, as I was talking about, most of the central bank has been making an attempt to launch a central bank digital currency. It's primarily maybe one of the pointers, since the cryptocurrencies adoption is increasing and most of the cryptocurrencies are not regulated or backed by the central bank. So that's where the government and the central bank is trying to put on a legalized kind of a structure for launching their own cryptocurrencies in form of the CBDCs. And if you look at India has already moved to a stage where the development and the pilots is getting started, right? While some of the countries in the Bahamas, Jamaica, and some of the South America and all these things, primarily they have already put into that regular use. So if you try to understand the note, some couple of the key points that you will come to know, like one is that definitely it's going to be sovereign currencies. That today the fiat currency is a sovereign currency which is being provided by and issued by the central banks and is linked to the monetary policy. The same the CBDC is also going to hold it. It's going to be liability on the central bank balance sheet. That's very clearly that's one of the critical insights that's coming from the note. It means that currently liability is lying with us in your current digital currencies with our banks with whom we are holding an account, but here it's primarily going to be central bank balance sheet where the liability with RBI. It can be used as a legal tender by enterprise, the citizens, the government agencies, freely convertible with fiat currency. As I was talking about the previous slide, currently it has been put it as a 1:1. It's not going to be the kind of the trading value kind of the mechanism that's currently we see with the cryptocurrency. It's going to completely link to your fiat currencies. This is there. Possible legal currency that you may not need to have a bank account, and it's primarily expected to have the lower cost of the issuance of money and transaction because you're not going to print the physical currency, you're not going to use the physical currency, transportation and all these things. So those are the management overheads for this fiat currency may be going down. And the CBDC currently, the way notes propose about that, it has two kind of the variants. One is wholesale CBDC, and I'll talk about a few of the things in subsequent slides. Second is on the retail CBDC, where that also the mode of the transaction, the mode of the management, it has been defined into three formats: the direct or indirect, which two-tiered, or the hybrid. So two-tiered and the hybrid is primarily as an indirect method of CBDC operations. Okay, so wholesale CBDC, if you look at it, it's only primarily within the banks and the intermediary, the transaction which happens today, right? Primarily, objective is to ease out that entire the settlement process for the transactions which happen between the central bank and the different banks and the institutions. Like today, if you look at it, one of the pilot which was launched with the 9 banks participating and some 48 transactions of what 275 crore was done, where the CCIL and the RBI involved into the GSEC securities buying and sell. So that's where it's like settlement which needs to happen within a third party intermediary coming into the picture, and then cost associated with that. That's primarily they were trying to solve it, like the money line, the digital currency line with the central bank, and that central currency is lying with the banks being used to facilitate the transaction. So that's only between that RBI and the different banks or participating intermediaries who are there, the transactions. So that's on the wholesale. And most of the banks, central banks across the globe has also tried to launch into that, because settlement is one of the critical components comes into the picture. On the retail side, that's where that any citizens or the enterprise want to use for the retail transaction purpose or for the commercial purpose can use this retail CBDC. So retail CBDC doesn't mean that it can't be used for the SMEs, or SMEs is primarily for the all the sort of the transaction which currently we see in the market, right? In the direct retail CBDC, your money is the digital currency money which primarily going to hold with the central bank, and any individuals or the merchants or the CBDC primarily transacting using that central money which is being held with the central bank, right? So that's where the direct retail CBDC, the concept has been laid out. While two-tiered, primarily they're talking about the involvement of the intermediaries. Typically, the way that today the digital payments operations work, where they have the banks, where that our accounts are there, and then central bank, or the NPCI, which is primarily kind of the multiple layers of the transaction happen. The similar structure has been laid out into two-tier retail CBDC, where your E-Rupee is held by the central bank, while the intermediaries are being used, like maybe your banks, X bank or Y bank, and they used to facilitate the transaction. So that's primarily on the two-tier approach. While again extending the same concept which is there in the currently in the market, we would have seen in the UPI where that you have the central entity like NPCI, and then you have the various banks involved, and then various PSPs like Google and PhonePe kind of the players involved into facilitating the certain transactions. The same concept is also being explored in the hybrid retail CBDC, where that you have the central bank and various intermediaries, including the PSPs players getting involved and facilitating the transactions. But again, most of the places, the concept, the note which is trying to talk about that money is E-Rupee is being held with the central bank, while the transaction facilitation is being done by the intermediaries in place. This is primarily that within that retail CBDC and then all the different variants which has been suggested, trying to summarize, which is again from the CBDC note that said liability again is going to be the central bank. So it means that your E-Rupee is being held by the central bank, while issuer could be the central bank, issuer bank in the two-tier issuer bank issued, while intermediaries distribute it, right? And similarly in the hybrid, intermediary distribute it for the retail users. So that's their operations. Again, direct central bank, direct CBDC is between the users and the central banks, be it on the merchants or individuals. So central bank is directly involved into the process. While both in the two-tier and the hybrid structure, it's going to be the intermediaries, the banks or the PSP is going to involve into the whole of the process. This is interesting. The ledger where that all the transaction entries is going to manage, the settlement going to have taken care and all these things is going to be done by the central bank itself in the direct CBDC structure. While in the two-tier CBDC structure, it's intermediaries who are going to manage the lasers, and maybe hybrid intermediate as well as the central bank will have that kind of the laser being managed. And the settlement finality will be done by the central bank on the direct CBDC, because it's directly central bank is involved, no intermediary is involved. Into two-tier, central bank is not going to take, primarily the intermediaries will involve into doing the settlement, while hybrids, since central bank is also involved into managing the laser, they will also involve into the settlement. So that's a broadly structure. When the retail, RBI has already announced to do a pilot on the retail. How the pilot will go, whether it will only the direct CBDC, but assuming that since the 9 banks has already been participating, it could be the two-tiered approach or the hybrid retail approach that we may see as the pilots get announced. Another thing is also one of the design principle is being explored, that is it going to be the token based or the account based or the combination of both, right? Account based is where that typically currently all the transactions is being carried out in the typical our fiat currency structure, where the some central party is authorizing and confirming that okay, this account, this money belongs to this person, and the person is authorized to do the transactions, right? While in the token case, it's already confirmed that okay, this money belongs to me, and when I'm passing, that's also being validated by the counterparty without any intermediary confirming that okay, this money belongs to this particular person. The token able to carry out the identity and the with the public key and private key kind of the infrastructures that typically that we understand. And Sanchit will talk about some of the component that how the token operations can happen and will happen. He will talk about it. So that's the two combinations being approached. Again, I'm saying the whole structure, the way RBI has laid down that it may do multiple pilots going forwards before finalizing into that one particular structure in form of the how the delivery of the CBDC will happen, how the management of CBDC will happen, how the transaction will happen, and what kind of the technology will be laid down. I think it's multiple pilots will help us RBI to come into the final shape and size of the CBDC. Okay, so some of the platform feature that has been proposed, and it could be the centralized database kind of the structure, or it could be the DLT. But what are the couple of things are being looked at it from the RBI perspective, and that will be looked into while going through the different pilots, that it should be able to support the high volume and high transaction. We have seen in the case of the UPI, right? When it's working and when the different use cases evolve around the payment systems, differently it's primarily impacted on the high volume and high transaction rate. And that's where here also, once the CBDC comes into place, various use cases evolve, it may lead to a high volume. Zero downtime within a tamper-proof kind of the protocol to enhance the security part of it. That's always been one of the key concerns of the CBDC launch, is that making sure the security is embedded into the whole of the process. Interoperability and cross-platform support, that's also very critically being looked at it, that how the transactions can support with the CBDC and the UPI, for example, that how interoperability will facilitate. That's also one of the three principles that getting linked out. And what are the workflow, reporting structure, the fraud monitoring? These are again the various other operational aspects that being looked at it. So these are the critical components I think will continue to evolve when the RBI keeps on working on the technology backbone part of it and operational structure for the CBDC. Going forward in the multiple pilots, these are the things will evolve. And once these things comes into the place, the various use cases will also come into the place. Okay, so before now, so this was more on the CBDCs from the concept node, what has been visualized, and then now I will hand over to Sanchit to talk about that. What are the different aspects CBDC will explore into that going forward? So Sanchit, over to you.
So Shashank has already laid down the benchmark for how RBI today intends to use CBDCs, especially for wholesale and retail purposes. In fact, if you look at the white paper, they're pretty clear on what kind of implementations would be there for wholesale as well as the retail CBDC. So the white paper clearly states that for wholesale, they would expect very high volumes and especially reserves to be settled with RBI. And there will be technology of one kind used for that. In fact, even if you look at the CBDC structure itself, it would probably end up being an account-based CBDC for wholesale CBDCs. Whereas for retail purposes, people like you and me, they'd probably end up using more of a token-based approach towards doing that. And instead of using a typical non-blockchain technology, they'll probably use a blockchain technology. Maybe, I think we'll probably get to understand more of that when they talk about it. But the important thing to notice here is how they're trying to approach this for different use cases. So in the case of the wholesale market, right, they expect to use account-based systems because these are going to be entities which are going to directly interact with RBI. And so RBI needs to know exactly who holds how much balance, which is actually pretty similar to how RTGS works in this days and age as well. But next question might be, Acha, so if RBI already operates RTGS and they already have the identity of all of these banks today, why then implement a new way of doing it? And there could be multiple answers for that. So one of them could be, actually had by taking a quick look at what other wholesale CBDCs in the world have done. So if you take a look at what project Ubin in Singapore has achieved, so they've actually tried settling these sort of RTGS transactions through different gridlock resolution algorithms. Whereas, pretty much everywhere in the world today, there's probably a single way to resolve gridlocks in a settlement system. So what you could get with a wholesale CBDC is a much more programmable way of resolving these sort of gridlocks. And that's actually a good thing to have. So it would not be a one-to-one replacement of RTGS, but it would actually be something pretty close to that. And an account-based system just makes sense there. Whereas for a retail customer, the primary use case driving this kind of a CBDC adoption is not the settlement value on its own. What they would be trying to do is replace hard physical cash with digital cash. And the primary, I'd say, value of having the hard digital cash is the anonymity that it affords you for every single transaction. And so the RBI approach also takes care of that by having a token-based approach. And in a token-based approach, you're probably going to have an anonymized or a semi-anonymized DKMS-based system, which would let you create a public-private key pair on the fly and associate a balance against that. And RBI, again, or a distributor will send you a balance on that. And a receiver, as you can see in the diagram as well, would receive the tokens on the public address. Exactly the way they do currently on a private currency like Bitcoin or Ethereum today, and then send it to a payee again, who can then independently verify whether the payer actually had the balance or not. And this could be done either by a combination of Merkle trees, the way again it's already done in a blockchain, or something very similar to that as well. To take a very quick look at what this kind of an ecosystem would look like, Shashank, next slide, please.
Yeah.
So whether or not we're talking about a retail or a wholesale CBDC, the ecosystem is actually pretty clear. So you would have a central bank, setting up the ledgers somewhere in the middle, And then you would have your commercial banks who would be interacting directly with the central bank, right? And so once these sort of commercial banks are interacting with the central bank, this is the use case for having a typical wholesale CBDC, because that's where these banks would be making payments among each other and also balancing their reserves with the central bank as well. And so you would end up using a wholesale CBDC and managing settlements right at the central bank ledger layer. Now, one critical point in again the tech requirements as well has been the idea of programmability of these CBDCs. So RBI wants to have or wants to bestow upon the CBDC this capability of programmability, which basically means that whether it's a commercial or a retail user, they should be able to program their money to do a lot more for them. Which means that if you are a commercial entity or a commercial bank dealing with wholesale CBDCs, you can actually program your account with RBI to function as and how you please it to be. And this could also be exposed to third parties to program for them. And again, in case of RBI's implementation or the preferred implementation, they would expect the retail consumers to get their CBDCs in an indirect fashion from the commercial banks. Now, there's obviously this whole philosophy around who has liability and what happens if the intermediary commercial banks are just the distributors. Would they not again engage in fractional banking? And what really happens with the balance that an end retail user looks at? And there are multiple answers to that. We can probably take them up in the question and answer, the Q&A later. But for now, again, according to this white paper, the preferred approach is definitely the indirect approach, where RBI only deals in wholesale CBDCs with commercial banks, and commercial banks get to distribute those to retail customers in probably one of two ways. So they might either have wallets which they are in custody of, or these retail customers might have self-custody of the wallets again. It's quite possible that it's going to be a self-custodian kind of a situation where these wallets just have public-private key pairs managing it for them. And it's also quite possible, and this is the interesting bit, where these wallets could end up being, could end up exposing REST APIs, or even the capability of attaching multiple virtual accounts against each, which means that as an end user, you might be able to switch identities every single time you transact. And that's very similar to how people have been using cryptocurrencies as well for a fairly long time. Next slide, please. So a very quick look at how this entire value chain would go. Look, again, like I said, so the RBI would send these tokens to a ledger client. The ledger client effectively is a node. It's not a blockchain node. It's an abstraction of what a commercial bank is using to interact with the central bank. So this ledger client would accept again the distributed balances from RBI and then would transfer them to wallets. So these wallets would be consumed by retail customers like you and me, who would then have access to these virtual accounts. Now, in case of, like I said, these token-based CBDCs, these virtual accounts might be ephemeral or they might be long-lasting. But the important thing to notice also here is that this ledger account is connected to a user info database, which means that these distributors or commercial banks are actually using some kind of a KYC AML process when they're trying to distribute this digital cash to retail customers, and which will always be the case again, which means that there is no going around this method. Even when you're trying to, let's say, take out some balance from your UPI wallet and convert it into digital cash, that's always going to happen. What's also interesting is you could potentially use your virtual account and connect it to different payment gateways. So this could be a payment gateway. This could just be one of the many payment gateways that we have today, which might get integrated with CBDCs when they come up. Or it could be just a P2P transfer happening from one virtual account to another, in which case you would not really require streaming, but you would just require a token balance to be transferred from one to the other on the basis of a single central ledger, which would take care of the settlements itself. And finally, once you have all these transactions built, processed, and ordered, you would then have a settlement on some kind of a ledger. Now, in case of these indirectly distributed CBDCs, you would have that settlement done at the commercial bank level, In case of wholesale CBDCs, the settlement would happen on a central ledger, which is maintained directly by RBI. So what you see at the bottom here, the data channels send the transaction instructions to a central ledger. Yeah, the central ledger could be different on the basis of use cases. For a retail use case, the central ledger is for you, it's the commercial bank, but for wholesale use cases, it's actually RBI itself. Let's take a quick look at what this would mean for a typical retail scenario when we're talking about wallets and wallets linked to our entities. Next slide, Shashank. So in this case, it's quite clear from what the white paper also lays out is the fact that there are going to be different wallet capabilities associated with the CBDC itself. And the thing about wallets is they work very well today, especially, and they work very well, especially in an online context. So as long as you have you're connected to a network, you have internet capability, you're all fine. But you have to understand that the retail CBDCs intend to replace the bearer instrument of physical hard cash, which means the intent of the central bank today is to replace or at least partially replace what comes with physical cash. And the primary is its ability to be transactable without network connectivity as well. So in order to handle that, this is the closest I think they can probably come, which if you look closely is basically a single central ledger for settlements. Again, this could be just the ledger maintained by a commercial bank. But if you look more closely, while the end entity, the person on top left, while the end entity would have an edge wallet, it could be a wallet which would be similar to a mobile application, or it could be even a top-up card that you might have, like a metro card or something, which you could get recharged with additional tokens. But the important thing is that these edge agents or wallets would have to frequently sync with the cloud agents and wallets. And these cloud agents or wallets would be maintained by your distributor, in this case, a commercial bank, obviously, who's maintaining the central ledger for you. And this central ledger for the commercial bank would then have to also get integrated with the wholesale CBDC ecosystem. So the white paper also talks about the fact that even when indirect CBDCs are adopted or the indirect CBDC scenario is adopted, the commercial banks would have to always report on the distribution of retail CBDCs, and the parity of what they get from RBI and what they report has to be on a one-to-one basis, which means we are not going to be dealing with fractional reserves as far as CBDCs are concerned. They are supposed to be treated just like cash. Next slide. So as you can see, what's really changed is the fact that the edge agent available with the end user is now able to sync with the cloud agent. What's also changed is the fact that I've replaced the central ledger with the blockchain. And that's one of the flavors that RBI also mentioned. So while they are very clear on the fact that wholesale CBDCs would require immediate settlement and would require high transaction handling capabilities, and so it would be a non-blockchain implementation. They are still undecided on whether they would use or not use blockchain for retail CBDCs. So what you see right now is an implementation of a cloud/edge agent, which ends up using blockchain as the central ledger with the commercial banks. Of course, this settlement layer would eventually have to settle with the non-blockchain layer that RBI implements as well for wholesale settlements. Next slide. And this is what I think this all leads to. So we've already seen how end users can maintain wallets, and these wallets can connect to cloud-based systems which are available with their banks. The question is, how do we make this as close to an offline process as possible? And I think this is actually a concept that I came up with, which comes pretty close to that. So we already have *123# in India, especially for making UPI payments in a non-internet manner. And you could potentially do something similar here, where your payer and payee are both using a USD.
I think Sanchit, we are losing you. Sanchit, we are losing you.
An SMS, and this eventually connects to AI with the who already has a cloud. So like I was saying, the USSD would connect to a gateway available with the commercial bank, and the commercial bank would have access to your cloud-based wallet, and they would then trigger a release of funds from your cloud wallet to the Pay's cloud wallet as well. And this would be an almost offline way. That's why I've said, it's a sort of offline method of making payments through retail CBDC, and we could potentially see something similar to this. Like I said, it's just my concept of how it would happen. It might be somewhat different, not too much, hopefully. And finally, just to add a bit more tadka to this, the RBI concept note also talks about the fact that since multiple central banks are already working on different implementations of CBDCs in their own regimes, they're probably going to have to deal with interoperability very soon. And so what we would have to see is, next slide, Shashank, something like this. So each one of these triads would represent an ecosystem of CBDCs. So what you're seeing right now is multiple central banks who are interacting with each other for cross-border settlements. And what could happen is they might end up agreeing on some kind of a ledger technology, blockchain / non-blockchain, either would work, and these nodes would be capable enough of handling different kinds of payment messages. So if you see that the central bank B payment message is in an empty format, whereas central bank C's payment message is in ISO format. And so you might have these ledger nodes either capable natively or maybe connected to a middleware which would parse the ISO messages and then transform them into a ledger compliant format which everybody can understand. I think we can probably all agree that if they're designing this from scratch as a greenfield project, they might end up adopting ISO for this sort of interledger communication for this. The important thing to note here is that at every given step, and this is also true of what Project Ubin has accomplished in their very recent concept note as well, is the fact that they're going to have to address problems at different levels of the stack. So right from the infrastructure, where they decide whether to go ahead with a blockchain or a non-blockchain way of building their ledger nodes, to selecting the network on which they are going to transact among each other, to the fact that these transactions could also be made programmable. So I've already talked about the fact that your commercial banks or even your wallets might end up exposing REST APIs, which would be amenable to programmability. It's quite possible that these central banks might end up building these ledger nodes to be compliant with smart contract standards as well. So that would enable a whole host of applications which might span trade finance, supply chain financing, cross-border escrows, stuff like that. And finally is the connectivity. So connectivity would end up being the single standard, addressable layer, which would be which could be used by anybody. So I think this would be TSPs managing these gateways and exposing connectivity to this sort of connected or rather interconnected CBDC ecosystem via REST APIs over an OIDC implementation of some kind, which basically means that you would have backwards compatibility with your existing ecosystems as well as your tech choices as well. So what we've covered so far is what RBI talks about in their concept paper, what we've seen in the space so far, and what I think is also going to happen as far as retail and wholesale CBDCs is concerned, and how this might end up influencing CBDCs when they have to be interoperable as well. Back to you, Shashank.
Thanks, Sanjay. Thanks. So, Sanjay has already spoken about some of the use cases from trade finance to the supply chain finance, the cross-border, the government disbursement. So, these are some of these use cases being explored and also primarily to reduce the operating cost to manage the fiat currency, right? Also it's talk about, and if you try to look at it, it may also try to solve the multiple challenges because it's not going to be free of the challenges or the issues which it's trying to, and it's just talking about within the notes also. One is the interoperability, since the country has already have the multiple real-time payment systems. So how it's gonna work in conjunction with all those various multiple real-time payment systems, right? Confusion is also about that how the different type of the money forms will take place, right? Because you're gonna have the physical currencies, and then you're gonna have the two form of the digital currency. And also one of the very critical component is also exploring the remuneration and non-remunerative form of the CBDC. It means that whether this will also face the interest. Like today, if you are holding your money in the digital form with any bank, you earn certain percent of the interest rate, interest on that. So whether that's also is going to be one of the things explored, that whether it will have the interest. And the clarity on the compliance structure, that how it will take care of the compliance structure with respect to the AML and the fraud risk management and various aspects with related to financial transactions, right? And interoperability, and definitely it's also not trying to solve that cash will be eliminated, cash will be there. So there's the challenges it will say. I think going forward, we'll see as soon as the pilots keeps on coming, the results are getting announced, the bank's participation start getting, we may start getting lots of the clarity in going forward. It will take 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. We don't know, but I think sooner that we'll start having that answer for most of the questions. So with this, we just wanted to take a short take. Me and Sanchit will take a now pause and we'll open for the question answers. But before we get into the questions, request you to please share your feedback. The team has already put that feedback form in the chat box. Please refer. And we'll request you to give your feedback. Feedback always help us to improve. So that's where there. And please go ahead with the questions. I can see some of the questions in the chat. So probably, yeah. So if anybody wants to ask the questions, otherwise I'll just pick it up from the questions which are there in the chat. Okay, so till that question comes, Rajiv is asking whether what programming language is the RBI considering for programmability of the CBDC. Sanchit, I'm not sure whether it's still that clarity is there because it's a multiple pilot, but what's your take?
No, so the white paper doesn't talk anything about the languages that we're discussing. There is no specifics today on architecture, but you can rest assured that there are going to be REST APIs available to service providers who will be able to connect to the token service providers to program these tokens. But it's not going to happen anytime soon. RBI is still evaluating what kind of endpoints or even interfaces they might want to expose to make this work.
Yeah, Vivekanand, please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, my question is what are the possible roles a private entity can play in this entire CBDC project?
Sorry, I couldn't able to. Can you just come up with your question again? Vivek?
What would the possible roles that a private entity can play in the CBDC ecosystem?
Okay. And also very similar questions are there from the Sudipta. What are the opportunities for the fintech here? Is it working with those 9 banks? So Sudipta and Vivek, I think the way you would have seen that the different tired approach that RBI is talking about. One is that way. Let's say, for example, the third one, which is hybrid kind of the CBDC, where definitely it's talking about the involvement of the various PSPs. And PSPs could be the fintechs having that payment facility kind of the infrastructure which can participate working with the intermediaries and the CBDCs, and then building up some of the use cases, merchants participation and the fintechs, both the side, retail side, they can build a solution. The way you could have seen that Google or the Google Pay or the Phone Pay try to evolve their business model. So that's a one very straight case, looks like that it will come. How it will be working in this current pilot with the 9 banks? I think 9 banks is currently is the pilot. So we are not sure whether there any fintech participation is going to be there. What kind of the transaction will be carried out? I think once this results gets out from this pilot, then we may start getting clarity that, okay, these are the space that we can participate. But one thing is very clear that in this hybrid structure, definitely there going to be a play for the fintechs. And those models of the hybrid, then it can talk about that the various use cases building up, maybe to take the payments, so maybe in the building a supply chain finance or any of the, it could be the cross-border payments kind of the structure also. So that's where that space is there. That means definitely it will open up the door for the fintech participation, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sundar is asking, could there be functionality to enable the bank to issue a wholesale CBDC received in the wholesale transaction as a retail CBDC to an end user? As far as I understand, Sundar, no. Wholesale CBDC is primarily going to be restricted to for the participation between the central bank and the intermediaries banks for the government securities kind of the transaction or kind of the interbank settlement that happens between the banks. So I don't think that wholesale CBDC may be used for the retail CBD. That's my understanding. Any question, guys? Okay, Sanjay, there is also a question, Nitin, as I think it's a comment, no need to keep a hardware-based laser for end user. Nitin, can you explain the questions if you can help to understand more on your question?
So how the end user is going to keep the currency?
So a couple of ways here, right? So like I said, there are two ways in which you could do this. You could either have a custodial wallet, which your wholesale or commercial bank would hold on your behalf, or you could have a self-custodied wallet as well. So they're open to both. I think either would be fine in a token-based scenario. Of course, when it's a custodial wallet held by your commercial bank, even if it's a token-based retail CBDC, you end up losing anonymity. So I think for the most part, it would be a self-held wallet of some kind, and this could end up being a card or maybe a mobile application of some kind, if it comes to that. Or yeah, a hardware wallet as well. I mean, all you have to do is you have to is store and record your DKMS, your distributed key management system, in a sandbox isolated fashion. So you could do it in a hardware wallet as well.
Okay, thanks.
Again, a request, we'll keep on taking the questions and answer. And also, there's just a request, please put out your feedback. In the link is already there in the chat box. Maybe Anushka or Maitri, can you just put the chat again? Okay, before I just pick up the questions, there were also questions coming up. How you also, does you cover this into your programs, the trading program? I'll just again quickly just touch upon initially, some of you might have missed out. So we are coming with our own executive program in the fintech and open banking, where that we have a specialization program on the financial blockchain, where me and Sachin again cover the entire CBDCs and the entire blockchain and various use cases in the detail. And there are also industry mentors comes and talk about the various, including the banks and all these things, those who are deploying the blockchain in their entities, and then coming and talking about that how they have been using the blockchain. So that's where we cover. This is like kind of 6 months programs, half day every Sunday. Okay, that's a program is there. You can reach out to Srikanth at thedigitalflip.com, Srikanth, and then you can get more details from him. These are the programs, products are there. Introduction to fintech, the digital lending, where we try to look at the various models of the lendings, be it on the cash flow lending, the P2P lending, the SME lendings, revenue-based lending. So all sort of the models get discussed, and these models are get discussed by the founders and the business banking heads, those who are building those models. Entire the product management, how the digital product managements get building, all the aspect of the payments where that NPCI guys and the various other representatives comes and talk about their entire the product models. So that's there. And open banking, we try to look into the different dynamics of open banking, how the open banking architecture works, what is the neo banking, what is embedded finance. We try to get look more detail into that. And a specialization already spoke about the entrepreneurship, digital banking, and in the blockchain that we go into more in detail. And just quick bite, again, as a reminder for all the participants that we are coming with our own event called our FinTech Summit, where it's a 2 days event for the industry leader participation from both the banking, BFSI segments, the FinTechs community, the technology enablers, and all these things, participations coming, including the government bodies included. So that's there in the ground here. You can get to know more details on the bharatfintechsummit.com and keep on visiting our LinkedIn handle. So I'll just stop and I'll just take a few questions more there. Yes. So there is a question, Sachin, how will the digital currency will be valued against the forex currency, foreign currency. Paul, if I understand the question, it's we're talking about the foreign currency. Sajid, would you like to?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, okay, Paul. Yeah.
Paul, you'd like to elaborate?
Yeah. So basically, what I was trying to understand is once we have this digital currency, how will this be valued against the foreign currencies? So, say if will it be valid against a foreign digital currency or a real, like say against USD or any currencies? How is that being planned?
I think it's probably going to be another implementation of a DEX or a decentralized exchange where you would have again the similar manner of valuing one currency against another. So you would have a supply and demand for one against another, and that's how it would work. So it'll actually be very similar to what we already see with a lot of private cryptocurrencies today. I think, like I said, there are two ways you could go about it. Either have a central global exchange do this for you, which would be like an oracle in blockchain speak, or you could have a decentralized exchange where each node is also managing, the order book for every currency price available. So you could go either way there.
There's a question from Sadgopal, I think very interesting. Not a question, but more than a pointer that can we look at it, the other countries that who have already launched or setting up the digital currencies, what are their technology architecture? So maybe this is just in a one session, and within the 45 minutes, it would be very difficult to cover that other aspects. But I think some of the insights Sanchit was also trying to bring it out, but the experience of looking at that what other countries are doing. But Sanchit, you have been closely working globally with various countries. Do you have any insight that what kind of technology?
Yeah. So I think one of the most mature in this space is definitely Project Ubin. So they launched the project around 5 odd years ago, which means they're already at iteration 5 of the same. And they've been publishing regular updates on their tech decisions. And like I said earlier in the session, the very first iteration of Project Ubin was trying to replace a real-time gross settlement system for there. And the use case was to create a gridlock resolution algorithm, which would be tweakable, parameterized, and you could replace that algorithm with some other algorithm, and it will still work. Again, as opposed to your typical RTGS, which only has a single way of settling transactions. So that's what they did, and I think it's worked, and they tried implementing it on different ledger technologies. In fact, so they used Hyperledger Fabric, they used Quorum, which is a private permission flavor of Ethereum, and they also use R3 Corda to test this out. Very recently, they've also been doing this for sort of cross-border CBDCs. So they're trying to integrate with Australia and the sort of cross-border trades group that they've set up as well. Meanwhile, there's also Project Jasper, which is, I think, led by Canada, and they also have this cross-border CBDC implementation in place, which is also on open source. But the most sharing on this front has been Project Ubin till date. So they are actually open source. A lot of the tech that they use is also open source, and they frequently contribute their findings and research online as well. So maybe Shashank, next time we can actually focus a bit more on what they've been doing. Meanwhile, again, so if you're just talking about CBDCs, I think it's important to make a point here of actual CBDCs in practice as well. I think China is the most mature of the lot, and they've been using wholesale CBDCs for a while now, and they've implemented their stack on non-blockchain technology. So their CBDCs are not powered by blockchain at all, and they plan on launching the CBDCs for retail as well, which I think would be tied into with their social credit system as well, and that too might end up being a non-blockchain stack again. So that's what China has been doing.
Thanks, Sanchit. I think you have already covered, but again, the question is from Neeraj Toshniwal. So he's asking, in case of retail CBDC, commercial bank generates a token against each transaction, against each rupee. And how is
Actually, sir, here's how I think you should think about it. So I think Shashank had a very informative slide about this as well, on the different mechanisms of CBDC distribution. So if you think about CBDC distribution, there are actually 3 major ways. There's the direct, there's the indirect, and then there's the hybrid. In the direct distribution way, the central bank would directly give you CBDC. So there's no intermediary at all. So even an intermediary like your own bank would be at the same level as you. So there's no separate hierarchy. RBI at the top and everybody else at the bottom. So that's the direct way, which means you don't have to go to your retail bank to get your retail CBDC. No, RBI would create an account for everybody, which means if India has 1.3 billion people, 1.3 billion accounts, and every one of them would have retail CBDCs. That's one way of doing it. The second is the indirect way, where RBI would only ever deal with commercial banks and RBI would only deal in settling the reserves of these commercial banks through wholesale CBDCs, and then also send them tokens, and these tokens would then be sent to you as the end retail consumers. So in that way, what would happen is that your commercial banks would end up being the distributors, but they would also have to settle with RBI on the wholesale CBDC. The third, which is the fintech friendly way, is the hybrid, where RBI holds accounts, but your intermediaries end up being, again, so they don't just end up being distributors, they are, or even in the settlement chain, because settlements only happen with RBI in this case. It's just that instead of RBI creating 1.3 billion accounts, the intermediaries in this case do all of the KYC, AML for everybody in India. And the accounts are created at intermediary levels, and RBI just does the final settlement for blocks. And so what you are thinking about is probably the indirect way in which the commercial banks still exist. They also deal in wholesale CBDCs, but they also take tokens or retail CBDCs from RBI directly and then send them over to retail customers. I think that's what's going to happen for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Sanjit. Okay, again, a sincere request to all of you to please share your feedback, and also those who share the feedback will get that PDF version of the deck that we presented today. So request you all to please share your feedback. Based on your feedback, we'll send you the deck. So please do that. Thanks. It's always help us. So thank you very much. And we have a space. Still have some time for one or two more questions. So please, anybody has any questions, please do share.
Yeah, we have, I think, 1 odd minute before I jump into my next session here.
Okay, so if again, thank you very much, guys. Thank you for the discussion. Again, a request again, because feedback helps us. So that's why I've been very greedy about that. You please share the feedback. It's an improvement. And those who share the feedback with their email ID, you will receive that PDF version of the deck. So thank you, guys. Thank you very much, and thank you, Sanjit, for taking out time. I know you are sitting in the Bangladesh and at the client place, but taking out time and having a chat with us. So thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you. Lovely catching up, and we'll connect again. Thank you.